This time we want to share our history bit. And today's history bit is going to be on something that we've shared before. I find it important occasionally to rehash some of what we have shared, because there may be some who did not have the opportunity to hear this information. And so I want to share it because I believe that it's important that as we are learning about the history of our faith, and when we hear certain things in the teaching, that we begin to understand the reason behind why particular things are said, or why certain mindsets, or shall I say how certain mindsets are developed among different groups in the Bible. And so when we are able to understand the background regarding certain things, we're able to get a clearer picture. And today what I want to do is just share something that is written in the book of Josephus in War of the Jews, book 2, chapter 8, in section 2. And this particular portion that I'm going to read is about the three religious sects within Israel, in particular among the Judean Israelites. This is about the three sects or branches of the faith of Israel that existed roughly from the 2nd, or shall I say 3rd century BCE, moving to the time of the Messiah. And here is the reading. For there are three philosophical sects among the Jews, the followers of the first of whom are the Pharisees, of the second, the Sadducees, and the third sect, who pretend to a severer discipline, are the Essenes. These last are Jews by birth, and seem to have a great affection for one another than the other sects have. Now, most of us who are familiar with some history about the sects within the Judean Israelite community have heard about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. For anyone who has read their Bible at any length, you'll see reading in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or Yochanan, you'll see the names Pharisees and Sadducees in many places with reference to the religious leaders of that time. You don't find the Essenes mentioned because the Essenes were primarily a separated group. They were a sect that ostracized themselves from the larger community of the Judean Israelites because they believed that they had to maintain a higher standard of holiness righteousness and did not want to participate with the Pharisees or the Sadducees because they felt as though those two sects were corrupt. Now, Josephus is the one that's sharing this information with us. Josephus was the historian for the Judean Israelite community and also for the Romans. Josephus used to be a military leader in the region of Galilee. So Josephus was fully aware of the sects of Israel. He was a Judean Israelite. So he knew his people. When he was captured by the Romans in Galilee, the Romans wanted to use him to gather information about the Judean Israelites. And so he began to write a history. And when it came to writing about the three sects, he said that we have the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. And the Pharisees were a group who had great influence among all of the Judean Israelites within the Roman Empire. They were the most influential. The Sadducees, however, were the ones that controlled the temple. This group was the ones responsible for taking care of the holy things. Everything that pertained to the temple, that's what the Pharisees did. The establishing of the calendar, the Pharisees, not the Pharisees, but the Sadducees did that. So the Sadducees was that group that had the legal power, if we can understand that in terms of over the Israelite community. But what's interesting about Josephus' statement here is that he said, and I'm going to read this again, I want everybody to catch this. He said with regard to the Essenes, he says that these last, regarding the Essenes, are Jews by birth and seem to have a great affection for one another than the other sects have. So Josephus is saying that the Essenes were blood-descended Judean Israelites. But by making this statement, he was also indirectly inferring that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were not blood-descended Israelites. So then if they were not blood-descended Israelites, then what that tells us is that they were primarily composed of people who were converts to the religion of Judaism. Another aspect of history that we need to be mindful of when it comes to Josephus' statement is to know about Herod. How many of you ever heard of Herod? Now, Herod, this is the first Herod. He was an Edomite, but he was also a converted Jew. Herod was able to work his way into a position of power and to become a deputized, if I can use that term, king over Judea by the Romans. And when that happened, Herod began to put his family members into positions of governmental authority over different regions in Judea. But he didn't just stop there because, you know, as a leader, you want to have those who have power, authority, and influence over people to have allegiances towards you. So what Herod did was remove the majority of the priests that were Sadducees, and also those who were in key positions of power among the Pharisees. He removed them, and he put in place those whom he knew that would support him and that would maintain an allegiance towards him. Now, those individuals that were put in these now religious positions of power in the seats of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees were also converted Edomites. That's who they were. And so with this now being the situation, Herod had greater control and influence over the land of Judea. And so when Josephus writes this little portion here, he's writing from that backdrop. He's writing from the already understood history that had occurred with Herod removing those who were in key positions within the two major religious sects of Israel and replacing them with converts to Judaism. This is the reason why those within those particular sects did not really have that great of an affection to one another, because you got to understand, if you come from a family who was forced into being converted to a faith, because Idumea, which was just south of Judea during the time of the Hashmonean period, they went down into Idumea and took over Idumea and forced Edom to be converted to the faith of Israel. So if you come from a family where it's like, you know, you talk about what you used to practice and what you used to believe in, but, you know, now ever since them Jews came down here, they forced us to become like them. So we have to practice this faith, but, you know, we're just going to do what we need to do, but see how we're going to be able to get into positions of power. So they were not really concerned about trying to follow the details of the scripture. Their concerns were primarily about working this religion and making a better life for themselves. And so Josephus knew about it. Josephus was aware of it. And Josephus makes mention of it in his writings. So he says that of these three groups, the Essenes, which were Jews by birth, it says, have a greater affection for one another than the other sects have. And that is because when you're someone that has a history, a long history of being in a particular faith and knowing what Elohim has done for your forefathers, this word generally means a whole lot more than someone who is coming into a faith who's actually being pressured into coming into a faith. See, if you are forced to practice a particular thing, and you do it because of the political powers that surround you, and you do it because you have no other choice, then you're not doing it because you love it. You're not doing it because it is in you. You're doing it because you have no other choice. It's the same as like Jews who were living in Spain and Portugal and England who were forced by the Catholic Church to become Catholic. But yet at the same time, behind closed doors, they were still practicing Judaism. And so today, it's important for us to have a knowledge of this information that Josephus has shared with us. And the reason why it's important that we have this knowledge is because when we talk about the Pharisees, as we read in the Bible, we now get a greater understanding of why they were the way they were. We now get a greater understanding of why the Sadducees were the way they were. We understand why there were these things called the booths of Annas in the temple, where they had these animals that were available to be used and purchased for worship, but the worshiper that came from out of town and brought their own sacrifice, their own animal, they were told, your animal is not acceptable. They would come up with a reason now to say that their animal was not acceptable, but then would charge them multiple amounts to purchase one of their animals so that they could go and worship. It was a money-making scheme that the Sadducees had. And so when we understand the basis behind the origins of these groups, we begin to understand a little bit more about their actions and their activities in the scriptures. And so I hope that this information was helpful to you today. It's our desire to share history that will help us to have a more enlightened understanding of the scriptures when we read them. The Most High be praised.